Good afternoon, bon après-midi, bienvenue, and welcome to the National Managers Community Managers Connect virtual talks for December 1st, 2020. Je suis Lisbeth Savard, dirigeante régionale de la CNG pour la région des Prairies et des TNO. Veuillez s'il vous plaît noter que cet événement est enregistré. Please note that our event today will be recorded and a YouTube link will be made available following our session. We ask that you please click your screens to mute your microphone and turn off your camera. S'il vous plaît, cliquez sur votre écran pour désactiver votre caméra. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that I am in Treaty 1 territory and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land on which you sit. J'aimerais reconnaître que nous sommes situés sur le territoire du traité numéro 1, territoire traditionnel des peuples Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene et la patrie historique de la nation métisse. Je vous invite à prendre un instant pour réfléchir au territoire sur lequel vous vous trouvez. Virtual talks are just one of the several ways the NMC is working to engage over 40,000 managers and aspiring leaders across the country on topics of importance to you. Les conversations virtuelles est un des multiples moyens de la CNG pour rejoindre plus de 40 000 gestionnaires et aspirants gestionnaires à travers le pays et couvrant les différents sujets qui vous sont importants. La discussion d'aujourd'hui se tiendra dans les deux langues officielles. Soyez à l'aise d'utiliser votre langue de préférence. Nous tenons à créer un climat de sécurité linguistique, alors vous pouvez choisir d'utiliser votre deuxième langue officielle si c'est votre préférence aujourd'hui. The Managers Connect virtual talks are bilingual. Feel free to use the language of your choice in an atmosphere of linguistic security, your first or second official language. So for today's session, we'll be discussing remote work and the future of work with our special guests, Kathleen Clarkin, Director, Workplace Policies, Programs, Engagement, and Ethics in the Workplace, and Jason Fox, Director of Research and Strategy, both from the Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer. Kathleen and Jason will talk about remote work, telework, and the future of work related to your responsibilities as a manager and how you can support employees who are working from home. Lors de la séance d'aujourd'hui, Kathleen Clarkin, directrice, politique, programme, engagement et l'éthique en milieu de travail, Fox, directeur, recherche et stratégies, tous les deux du bureau de la dirigeante principale des ressources humaines, vous parleront du travail à distance, télétravail et futur du travail dans le contexte de vos responsabilités en tant que gestionnaire et comment vous pouvez soutenir vos employés travaillant à domicile. Merci à tous et à toutes de vous joindre à nous pour cette importante discussion. So Kathleen, comme nous le savons tous, le travail à distance au gouvernement a été instauré presque du jour au lendemain en raison de la pandémie. So it's been about 9 months since we've been living through this new reality. Nous nous sommes tous adaptés rapidement à cette nouvelle réalité du travail à distance. So I think the burning question on everyone's mind is, what exactly is remote work and how is it different than telework?
Merci, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for inviting us to talk about this. It is a lot to unpack, and certainly this is an interesting time for everyone. We're experimenting new flexible ways to get our work done. Had to learn to. So I'm really grateful to have this chance to talk through with you and to hear some of your thoughts as well as a community on what's been working well. So before diving into this, I'd like to give everybody a brief overview of telework and remote work, and that'll help to support the discussion further on. And we'll be able to talk a little bit as well about the specific tools and guidance that are there to help managers support their employees and yourselves while we're all working from home. So yes, the directive on telework is of particular interest to many departments and organizations right now as we're navigating these new challenges with working remotely that COVID-19 has brought to our daily lives. And really, before getting into too much as to what we at OCRO are doing to respond to the COVID situation, I need to underscore, and I'll say it a few times, I'm sure today, that telework is not remote work. They're not the same. So in the context of working from home, the intent of telework is for a flexible work arrangement that adheres to the Treasury Board Directive on Telework. It's subject to specific standards that must be included in a telework agreement. Telework is a voluntary arrangement where employees have pre-approval to carry out some or all of their work duties from a designated telework location, whether it be on a full-time, part-time, or an ad hoc basis. Dans le contexte de la pandémie de la COVID-19, alors que nombre de nos administrations étaient en état d'urgence, nous avons demandé aux employés de travailler à distance eux autres. Le travail à distance est un terme utilisé pour décrire le travail effectué à un endroit éloigné qui peut être une mesure temporaire durant des circonstances imprévisibles comme une pandémie, un état d'urgence, les intempéries, etc. La situation unique et sans précédent actuelle est mieux décrite comme du travail à distance ou travailler à la distance. Notamment, vous êtes devenus très familiers avec le télétravail et le travail à distance ces derniers mois, comme nous tous d'ailleurs. To best equip you moving forward, we have a presentation that will be circulated to you after as well, or may have been in the invitation, but it helps to map out for you some of the distinguishing characteristics between telework and remote work. So a few general considerations to take away for everyone is that, while it's true that some things have changed while we're working remotely, many of the important considerations regarding your responsibilities as managers and many of the corporate responsibilities and considerations shared with your employees do remain the same. So while we're working remotely, we still have to be mindful about the security of information. We have to be thinking of the privacy elements and considerations in the work that we do. Are we taking our information management responsibilities clearly, making sure that corporate knowledge is captured appropriately to be retrieved? Following the financial management principles, following the principles in the collective agreements that set out the terms and conditions of employment, keeping mindful of occupational health and safety responsibilities, some of which have pivoted a little. There's still a requirement, but how we fulfill that has changed, and certainly the duty to accommodate does not leave us. De plus, nous devons garder à l'esprit la vue de l'ensemble lorsqu'il s'agit d'élaborer des plans et des approches ministérielles afin d'assurer l'harmonisation avec d'autres priorités gouvernementales. Parmi celles-ci, on peut citer les suivants. Le discours du trône qui a souligné 4 éléments fondamentaux qui se rapportent à notre travail, soit lutter contre la pandémie et sauver des vies, soutenir les gens et les entreprises aussi longtemps que la crise durera, rebâtir en mieux en créant des emplois et en renforçant la classe moyenne, être fidèle à qui nous sommes en tant que Canadiens, y compris des progrès sur la réconciliation, l'égalité des sexes et le racisme systématique, puis aussi nos mandats opérationnels et ministériels, l'avenir du travail, l'accessibilité et la diversité et l'inclusion. Oh, merci pour quelqu'un qui a partagé les diapos. Nous sommes sur le diapo 6. So OCRO has been working throughout this time to develop and communicate a number of materials to support managers and employees throughout this pandemic. So I'm sure many of you have already found it, but please don't stop checking in on the Canada.ca website, where we've put lots of tools and guidance materials to help you and your employees while working remotely. A couple examples, the piece on managing your work and productivity, staying connected when working remotely, ensuring linguistic duality, being inclusive while at a distance, maintaining your well-being. More guidance is also available on Canada.ca for managers on the duty to accommodate during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as always, managers are encouraged to assess the accommodation needs for employees who are working remotely. Some of this is a little more difficult in this time because of the usual protocol and precautions, but it is still our responsibility to ensure that we are accommodating our employees to do the work they set out to do. There's also a great collection of guides from the Canada School of Public Service that's available to assist managers and supervisors with some of the leadership elements managed virtually. I think someone's on. Some of these, again, examples include virtual team charter dialogue, mentoring practices. Oh, thank you. Helping people through transition and leading in uncertainty, activating remote teams. So a lot of stuff to help specifically target getting to your team and what are the needs that have changed possibly in this time. So through the school, Employees have access to online courses, events, and other learning tools in a multitude of subjects, including mental health and COVID-19. The school's even created a module on working remotely, including the 13 mental health job aids for managers. These tools really, whether it be the checklist, the PowerPoint presentations and documents, they're really there to help guide managers and employees in addressing specific needs, and many of them that have become more pronounced during the pandemic. There's also a step-by-step guide to having meaningful conversations with employees, which was designed to help you constructively navigate the challenging situations, which can be especially difficult to do even for the best of managers while at a distance, because you're missing out on the benefit of many of those nonverbal cues that you have when you're sharing and connecting in person. So some amazing tools at your disposal to help you get through these weird times, and hopefully you're finding them and finding them useful. And as you do find gaps or other pieces, please continue to let us know and we'll be happy to support. Il convient de noter que cette orientation ainsi que d'autres ressources ont été largement publiées sur le site web du Canada.ca pour s'assurer que tous les employés ont accès à des renseignements à jour. Pour préciser cette conversation, il y a une diapo, je pense dans la présentation, qui fournit une liste de certaines des façons dont nous avons communiqué et soutenu les ministères en ce qui concerne la gestion des personnes. Si on tourne au diapo 7, some of the pieces that we're in the middle of working on and moving forward. So we continue to remain really busy providing policy advice and guidance to departments to help them deal with the evolving COVID-19 situation. One topic of great interest, which got a big shout out in the financial update, was the T2200 Declaration of Conditions of Employment tax form to claim expenses relating to working from home. The Canada Revenue Agency continues to refine their approach and guidance to address allowable employee deductions during COVID-19. So how that's going to look is evolving, as well as the specifics on the benefits and allowances that employers can provide on a tax-free basis. Il devrait être achevé au cours des prochains jours, j'imagine, et sera affiché sur le site web de l'Agence de revenus du Canada. Nous continuons de travailler en étroite collaboration avec l'Agence de revenus afin d'élaborer un processus simplifié et une orientation à l'intention de tous les fonctionnaires pour la formulaire T2200 afin qu'ils puissent demander des dépenses liées au travail à domicile. Le bureau du dirigeant principal en ressources humaines est toujours d'avis que les ministères ne devraient pas rembourser aux employés les frais de services publics à moins de circonstances exceptionnelles. The provision of stipends, allowances, or reimbursements for equipment purchased and retained by employees has also been strongly discouraged. Doing so could constitute a change in the terms and conditions of employment or result in a taxable benefit. So we're really encouraging you all to work closely with your material management and finance teams to make sure we're following the procedure so as not to put anyone in a difficult situation. Another big piece have been questions regarding international remote work arrangements. Le contexte du travail a changé à tout jamais. Les premiers conseils et orientations offerts ont été élaborés pour une situation temporaire et sans précédent d'une durée de moins de 7 mois. Nous examinerons et établirons soigneusement la voie à suivre quant au travail à distance qui sera éclairé et déterminé par un certain nombre de facteurs au cours des prochains mois. So certainly many of you may have received questions from employees as winter approaches, and many departments are receiving a lot of hopeful requests from employees looking to work remotely from abroad, so well outside the existing work requirements to travel. So we've been consulting with key partners from the Department of Justice and other policy areas at Treasury Board and Shared Services to determine the bigger, longer-term implications and how the legislative requirements, the terms and conditions of employment, collective agreements, and other related directives would be respected if something like this were to move forward. There's quite a complex area of considerations and impacts on employees, not the least of which their safety and security and access to benefits. So until then, the recommendation has continued to be as a priority to respect the public health and global affairs advisories to not proceed with non-essential travel or international telework arrangements. A key piece as well coming forward, the policy on people management and the policy on the management of executives and supporting policy instruments came into force with a quiet bang on April 1st, 2020. Et nous n'avons pas l'environnement actuel dans lequel nous nous retrouvons. Alors, reconnaissant la pandémie, nous prévoyons que notre prochaine phase de cette initiative intégrera et adaptera une approche de gestion des personnes dans un environnement post-pandémique. So at the end of this little presentation, which we will be sharing, there's a few slides that will include some helpful links to some of the resources I've referenced et également inclus sur les coordonnées des domaines d'expertise. Alors, je vous encourage à envoyer vos questions, commentaires et suggestions à ces personnes ressources pour qu'on puisse vous appuyer dans ces temps très étranges. And I hope you found this quick overview helpful, and I want to leave some space for questions and for Jason's piece, and we'll be happy to continue the talk about how you are making the situation work in your departments. Merci beaucoup pour votre temps et restez en sécurité, puis je vous lance la balle pour les questions. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Kathleen. So this was quite timely information. At this time, we're opening up the questions, or the floor for questions. Alors, s'il vous plaît, posez la question dans votre langue officielle, dans la langue officielle de votre choix, en vous servant du clavardoir. So please feel free to ask your question in the official language of your choice using the chat feature. At this time, we're not using the raise your hand feature. So you simply have to type your question if you have one. Donc, ce n'est pas nécessaire de lever la main pour poser une question. Vous n'avez qu'à la taper dans le clavier. So, Kathleen, I do have a question for you. So how do telework and remote work apply to the current COVID-19 situation and those requests for reimbursement of associated employee incurred expenses?
Thank you. Yes. So the government of Canada has been doing everything it can to protect the health and safety of Canadians, including our public servants, as the country continues to respond to this pandemic. So the Treasury Board of Canada Secretary has been providing up-to-date COVID-19 information to employees, as well as guidance to deputy heads on how to navigate and possibly how to continue to equip employees to work through this time. So our advice and guidance to departments and agencies has been that managers should consider remote work for all their employees at all the work sites where possible, while still ensuring continued critical government operations and service to Canadians. So people have really been so flexible and creative and innovative, and it has also made many of us work together more closely in how we can better leverage our system. So provincially and nationally, Canadians have been asked to remain at home and practice social distancing, and we continue to recommend that departments and managers take these and other emerging public health warnings into consideration when making any determinations. But the interdepartmental group on easing of restrictions is also developing quite a lot of guidance that will help departments make that consideration and decision in an informed and safe way, putting people's health first.
Mm-hmm. Merci. Alors, on a une autre question dans le chat, et puis ça dit, savez-vous quand est-ce que nous aurons de l'information concernant le T 2200?
Oui, alors, comme je dis, c'était une des choses qui était inclus par par Christopher Land dans son oration. Alors, je sais que c'est quelque chose qu'on a prévu que il y a plusieurs employés à ce temps qui travaillent à distance. Alors, ça n'impacte pas seulement la fonction publique, mais d'autres employeurs et employés. Alors, ils cherchent à que ça soit quelque chose de plus clair, plus simple pour avoir des lignes directrices pour nous acheminer sur la bonne voie. Alors, à date, ce qu'on conseille, c'est que tout le monde, que vous gardez vos reçus pour qu'on puisse voir qu'est-ce qu'ils nous demandent à l'attente des taxes à la fin de l'année. Alors, c'est pas nous autres, mais c'est l'Agence de revenus du Canada qu'on va voir quelles seront leurs prochaines étapes. Mais comme je disais, on travaille en étroite collaboration avec eux autres. Alors, ils vont le faire sous peu. On n'a pas une date spécifique. Would you like me to repeat that in English or?
Sure, if you like, yeah.
Sure. So so just as to the T2200, it was a big piece of the recent announcement made by Deputy Prime Minister. And because it is impacting all sorts of workplaces across Canada beyond just the public service, the Canadian Revenue Agency is looking at, for this year, let's try to make sure it's streamlined, makes sense, is easy and accessible, and they'll be putting out that guidance soon. We have been in discussions with them to try to highlight some of the specific considerations for employees in the public service, and they're really appreciative of that information, but it'll be coming from them, and we will certainly keep connected with this community as soon as we have news. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I see another question. So it says, with the talk of a vaccine on the horizon, is there prospect of telework continuing to be available in a post-COVID-19 world, or is the expectation is that most teams will return to working in offices? That's a great question.
Yeah, so obviously the telework has wonderful benefits that were thought of when it wasn't for your own health and safety. But and many employees who maybe never thought that telework would be part of a solution for them have found there have been great flexibilities. So the directive on telework does set out what some of the key considerations would be, and if operationally feasible, then certainly it's a conversation many managers will be having with their employees, whether again, as mentioned, on either a full-time, part-time, or ad hoc basis, if telework could be part of the future solution. But the intent is that it does provide great work-life balance, that it can reduce our environmental impact by reducing commuters on the road. So I think it'll be part of a solution moving forward, but it is one consideration, and there's obviously always the operational feasibility too that's a big part of that. So it's certainly part of the discussions that deputies are having, looking at the easing of restrictions in the workplace. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I see the questions are coming in. Let's do another one and then we'll go to Jason's presentation. And then if we have time, we'll come back. Donc, je vois que les questions sont en train de défiler. Donc, on va en prendre une autre et puis ensuite, on va passer à l'autre présentation. Puis ensuite, on a quelques moments à la fin, on y répondra. So as you know, the conditions of employment are linked to providing a work location in the letter of offer. When will guidelines be shared from OCRA with the public service on how to deal with hiring new employees who would be living outside of the department's offices and location and working remotely from other Canadian cities?
Great, I'm really glad you raised that because yes, the location of work is a key part of that letter of offer, and it's framed out in many of the directives that the National Joint Council has with regards to travel status and relocation and many pieces. So having a designated workspace in some place is a part of that. So we are looking at the question because there are many employees at this time who aren't working in a physical office, so that it can open opportunities to have a distanced workforce. And there are other places in the past where people have either a hub environment where there's several federal agencies sharing a official space and that. So we are looking at the issue a little bit more, and it is certainly a really, as mentioned before, something that some hadn't considered but now is much more attainable. So we hope to be sharing information on that soon. So thanks for flagging it. In the interim, please, by all means, you can contact us and we can navigate what the current National Joint Council directives state to it if you are trying to work through a specific case. Perfect.
Thank you so much. So just in the interest of time, we're going to pause the questions, but this was really great information. And I think kind of ending it on this note is a good segue to our future of work conversation. So I'd like to hand it over to Jason. Thank you again, Kathleen. This was great. So Jason, my question to you is that are we going to have robots replacing us to do our work in the future?
Good question. So thank you for inviting me here today. And I'll just preface the presentation a little bit by kind of giving you a little introduction, and then I'll address your question about robots. Donc, merci encore une fois de m'inviter ici. J'ai à peu près 7 minutes. Alors, je vais passer à travers la présentation rapidement pour ensuite répondre à des questions. But my goal today is really just to get your mind thinking in a different direction. And some things that I'm trying to communicate today is that, you know, future of work can be a mindset, it can be a project, and it can just be a consideration as part of your normal management duties. And, you know, on slide 2 here, a lot of these mega trends that we're talking about in terms of future of work, c'était des choses qui étaient déjà dans le contexte de nos réflexions avant la pandémie. Mais maintenant, c'est des choses qui se sont accélérées ou qui ont pris plus d'ampleur au niveau du temps ou de l'impact de nos décisions. And one thing that I would invite you to do in terms of thinking about future of work versus maybe a traditional perspective about work is the future of work is always in the future. So it's really not a question of solving the problem today for a permanent solution. It's more about how are we evolving our approach over time. It's not so much about an end state, even though we're driving towards what we would consider an end state. It's about a state of readiness to address things that are accelerating or unpredictable or happening in a manner that we had not really thought through. And the last thing I would say is going from perhaps a static point of view in terms of human resources management, our organizational structures, our way of working towards a dynamic way of working. Alors, je donne ici deux acétates qui parlent un peu des recherches, des statistiques qu'on a identifiées dans nos recherches. But you know, the point of this, these two slides here, is really just to say that the amount of information about the future of work is, it's vast. If you Google future of work, you will get probably millions of returns on that that question. And the other thing that is important to note is that some of it is contradictory. So it's a little bit nuanced. So with respect to the question about will robots do our jobs, that depends. You know, there are different groups who forecast, you know, the rate of speed at which certain technologies will be incorporated. Others forecast, you know, the rate of job change, the rate of skill acceleration. But here I would say the important thing to understand is that there's a lot of different perspectives about this. And the key to getting through it and making sense of it is really to establish some priorities for your thinking and some reference points. Et puis, je vous amène à l'acétate numéro 5. So here, I'm just going to talk about a few kind of anchor points that might help you think through some of these perhaps daunting and occasionally contradicting things when we're talking about the future of work. And you'll see some of these happening at the micro level, meaning at, you know, in your own team, at you personally and individually, but also across the enterprise as we move through this. Donc ici, la première chose qu'on doit considérer, c'est quoi les bénéfices et les incidences pour effectivement les citoyens qui reçoivent nos services et nos conseils. Ensuite, pour les employés, et puis pour l'employeur. So what are the advantages of some of these, or the opportunities that are presented for employees, for the employer, and as well as citizens? And when we talk about planning, we have to look at this, or we, you know, I invite you to look at this in a few different ways. But the most important thing is, what is your mandate? What is it that you're asked to deliver on behalf of Canadians, and what is the service that you're trying to deliver? That is always a key consideration when you're planning or thinking about the future of work. No matter what work you're doing, it's always in order to deliver services to Canadians. Alors, c'est vraiment un point de principe qui est important et on ne peut pas détacher de nos réflexions. On doit aussi réfléchir à comment ces choses-là affectent l'effectif. Excusez. Comment ces choses affectent le milieu du travail, donc the physical aspects of work, and then the organization of work, which is, you know, how do we redesign work in order to accomplish it either quicker, better, differently? And here, you know, there are different dimensions of work, and we have in our research are coming up over and over again, and that's the people dimension of work. So how do you manage people? The physical dimension of work, meaning where is it happening? What is your surrounding? And then the last one is the digital, which is what is the technology context. Puis dans nos recherches aussi, on a identifié quelques thèmes qui sont récurrents, themes that are coming up across the spectrum of the research that we're doing. Increasingly, mobility and having an agile workforce is very important. So as managers, and you know, that is something that you're likely to be challenged with in terms of being mobile. How do you move talent around? How do you respond to new needs of talent, competencies? In terms of skills and competencies and leadership, the half-life of skills is reducing. So someone who, you know, maybe 20 years ago could go to college or get a degree, the life cycle of that information or that skill was maybe 15 to 20 years. Today, it's less than 3 years. So the dynamic of the skills required to do jobs is accelerating. Flexibility will also be a key driver of some of the thinking. So flexibility here, we're talking about all dimensions of flexibility in how we organize work, how we task work, how we move employees around, how we conceive of our environment, choices people can make with respect to their work. On a aussi les composants de diversité et inclusion. Il faut faire attention pour s'assurer que quand on fait nos plans et puis qu'on développe des réponses à ces challenges, qu'on apporte avec nous tous les gens qui sont impliqués dans ces changements et puis qu'on gère bien les conséquences inattendues sur certains groupes ou des des conséquences indirect consequences, donc ici. Et la dernière chose qu'on voit souvent, c'est la question de la productivité. So if you talk about telework, when, where, and how is telework the most productive? Meaning, how does it help them accomplish their tasks? What is the right ratio? Is every job equally doable from home, etc. Donc, je vous amène, il me reste 0 minute, alors je vais juste vous donner quelques idées et puis j'aimerais ça écouter vos questions et puis interagir avec vous sur ça. So how will this affect recruitment? So in terms of recruitment, as I mentioned, the half-life of skills is dynamic, it's reducing. So when you think about recruitment, sometimes we'll look at recruitment as a job to, and I would think about it more as an outcome to achieve. And looking at this from a total talent perspective, the concept of someone coming into the public service and having a 25-year career in a specific field is less and less likely. Careers change throughout people's lifetime. They will come in and out of the public service. There's the gig economy, which we have to be conscious of, but yet to be determined how it will affect the public service. Et ici, c'est vraiment, il faut penser, when you're recruiting someone, in 2 years from now, you may need somebody totally different. And the skills that you're recruiting for today in 2 years from now may no longer be relevant. So you want to focus on the ability of the people we're bringing into the public service to adapt and to learn on the spot. Ensuite, how does this help me develop my teams? Here's a couple of concepts that are important for you to think about as managers is the notion of adjacent skills. So sometimes, you won't be able to hire the one person that has all the skills that you need because of the job you have to offer is new. But there are people who are in your organization already who have skills that are close to what you need. So upskilling may be a better option. When you look at total talent, having those career pathways and things like this are very important. Again, I'm going to go quickly through these other things, and knowing you're on track here involves what I would say, making sure that you're iterating and that you understand what you're trying to do and that you take time to learn. And here I would say, consider whether the barriers that are there for you are real or imagined. So when we look back on the pandemic and we thought, the frequency of telework in the past might have been conceived as impossible, but today that premise has been challenged, I believe. Then the last, who can help? Well, many people in your organization can help, including your human resources officers, but also your colleagues, and especially those who are thinking about digital, thinking about planning, thinking about changes, and also the people receiving your services. So I would say, to conclude, I think future of work, it's important to keep in mind the big P policy challenges and the small P policy challenges, kind of like my colleague was talking about, sometimes we have to be directive and tell people exactly what to do, but other times we need to set a frame for general principles to apply and then allow for local flexibility. And then the last thing I would say here is that, I would invite you to remain dynamic. And that, I mean, how do you become and remain dynamic tout au long de ça, rester dynamique, ouvert au changement, autant au niveau individuel que dans votre équipe, que dans votre organisation. I know some of this is easier said than done, but again, future of work is a little bit of a mindset. It can be a project, but I like to look at it as a way of thinking that is organized around opportunities rather than barriers. Alors, je vais conclure sur ce point pour voir si des gens ont des questions et des commentaires, des inquiétudes par rapport à ça.
Okay, merci beaucoup. So I'd like to open it up to questions. So if you have a question, please type it out in the chat. Si vous avez des questions, sentez-vous libre de les mettre dans le clavardoir. Donc, Jason, I do have a question for you. So if we talk about innovation, when we're looking at initiatives, what are the key elements that an initiative needs to have to make it innovative? And does it need to be transformative and disruptive, or what are we looking at when we want to look at innovation?
Mm-hmm. So I would say there's many things to consider, and one of the the things that I think is overlooked occasionally is the notion of scalability. So, for example, under Blueprint 2020, for example, or beyond 2020, there are many initiatives that are considered, new, innovative, and kind of pushing the envelope. But for the public service to take those great ideas and then scale them across the organization, there has to be an awareness of how would that happen, right? So again, it's a change of mindset where when you're thinking about innovation, you can look at it individually. How do I individually innovate? As a team, how do we innovate? But if we're really talking about enterprise-wide innovation, thinking up front about how that would play out across departments or with other teams or within my department is a really key way of thinking. It's more integrated. It's a little bit more thinking about the impact of your innovation on a broader scale. And I think that's a mindset that for every project, if you're a lead on an innovation or you're thinking about something, taking even a small amount of time to think through how would I tell my colleagues in my department how to implement it across the department. And then the departments think about how would this be applicable in other departments to avoid situations where we have all of these competing versions of the same thing that are duplicative or going just slightly in a different direction that we can't harness the power of.
Right, and then that old working in silos kind of concept as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You may find that a certain innovation in HR brings negative consequences for those who manage our buildings. But to get truly innovative and to really get the best out of all those dimensions of work, when those things are aligned up front and they open doors and remove barriers for the idea, then that idea can flourish and it can grow across the organization and it doesn't have to kind of go back to the beginning.
Yeah. Wow, this is very exciting work. This is really interesting. So thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Alors, je vois qu'il y avait une question peut-être à laquelle on n'a pas répondu, puis je pense que c'est peut-être une question plutôt pour Kathleen. Donc, c'était au sujet d'une annonce qui a été faite de $400 qui allait être crédité aux travailleurs en télétravail sans avoir besoin d'une confirmation de l'employeur. Et puis, est-ce que cette mesure risque de remplacer le T2200?
Oui, alors c'est la même chose qu'il s'en parle, c'est ça. C'était une chose où l'Agence de revenus du Canada a proposé un montant pour faciliter que ça soit quelque chose d'un peu plus simple cette année au temps des taxes pour qu'on remet nos documents, qu'ils peuvent donner un peu plus d'une ligne directrice pour nous démontrer quelles sont les dépenses qui seront admissibles et ils jugent qu'un montant d'à peu près $400 sera ce qu'ils proposent. Mais ça se peut que dans des cas différents, il y aura d'autres exceptions, mais c'est ça, on attend à voir quelles seront les précisions, mais ils vont pencher là-dessus puis nous donner plus de détails sous peu, mais c'est la même chose, c'est ça. Merci.
Merci. OK. Alors, merci beaucoup, Kathleen and Jason. This was really interesting information. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to share all of this information. Donc aussi, merci à tous les participants d'avoir participé à la séance d'aujourd'hui. I wanted to thank all participants for joining us today in this session. So the information and tools that we shared today will definitely be helpful to all public servants as we try to lead and keep our teams engaged throughout these challenging times. So again, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Jason, for this great information. And thank you to all my teammates here at the NMC for coordinating this event. Donc, je voulais également remercier tous mes coéquipiers de la CNG pour avoir coordonné cet événement. So over the next 2 weeks, between December 2nd and December 9th, we're going to be quite busy. The NMC is going to be hosting several regional events, including topics on virtual work, mental health, and resilience. Donc, je vous invite tous fortement à nous suivre sur Twitter, @NMC, barre de soulignement CNG et Facebook, et à consulter nos bulletins d'information pour obtenir toutes les mises à jour relatives à la question. So we at the NMC hope that you will all join us for the next Managers Connect virtual talk taking place on December 10th, when we welcome Chris Bozic in a discussion on managing multiple generations in the workplace. Donc, nous vous invitons tous à participer à notre prochain événement de Gestionnaires Connect, conversation virtuelle qui se tiendra le 10 décembre avec Chris Bozic de l'École de la fonction publique, qui parlera des générations multiples en milieu de travail. So again, you can follow us on Twitter at NMC_CNG for all updates and registration details on all of our activities and events. And pour les nouvelles de la CNG, suivez-nous sur les médias sociaux. So until then, best wishes, bonne journée et à la prochaine. Merci beaucoup.
Bonne journée tout le monde.